Hello, welcome to Clergy and Collars Getting Coffee. Today, my special guest is the Reverend Evan Hansen, who is the pastor of North Presbyterian Church in Elmira, New York. Evan is a graduate of Princeton Theological Seminary, and he hails from the West Coast of the United States, where prior to entering ministry, Evan was a divorce attorney, though grew up in the church because you are also a preacher's kid.
I am.
Like myself, there are many of us out here. So welcome, Evan.
Well, thank you. It's wonderful to be here.
And I did get to see your little coffee mug that you're drinking out of. So what does it say? I can't read the writing on this.
Yeah, so it says it's official, you're awesome. This is my office mug because I got it my first October here at North Presbyterian Church. They surprised me and they said, here's just something for Pastor Appreciation Month. I had never heard of Pastor Appreciation Month. I had spent like almost my entire life in the church, not even just like in like the church I grew up with my dad, but like as the pastor, but in like different congregations. And no, this was the first time I'd ever heard of Pastor Appreciation Month. And so yeah, it's cool. I like it. It's a good office mug, and it's also on those days where you're like, why am I doing this? It's sometimes nice to look down and go, you're awesome. I'm like, okay, I'll work with them.
I'll work with that. No, it's nice to be appreciated.
It is.
I mean, and to do that and to be appreciated. So I'm glad they introduced, some all made up holidays aren't bad. It's nice. It's nice that somebody in the calendar world went, you know what, we really need to remind everybody to be kind to their staff. So here's Officer Manager Appreciation Day, and here's your Boss Appreciation Day, and I love it.
So what was horrible about that, though, is that when I was a partner at a law firm,
they don't have a Lawyer Appreciation Day, do they?
No, but they have Boss Appreciation Day. When you're a partner, you're boss. And so, so our staff would do that. And then our staff would also do Staff Appreciation Day because we'd all forget.
That's the bad part.
It is the bad part because
you made them bake their own birthday cake.
No. Now their birthdays were different. Their birthdays, we found out what it was a thing. Every birthday, whoever was one of the staff or the office administrator would go find out what kind of cake they wanted. So mine was like carrot cake. I love carrot cake.
Yes.
And
do you like raisins in your carrot cake, or are you like anti-raisin in the carrot cake?
I am not anti-raisin. I spent a part of my childhood in this place called Reedley, California, which is in the Central Valley, which is right next to I think it's like
now I have California
next to the raisin capital of the world. So I grew up with raisins as like being awesome. So no, I do the raisins. They're fine.
I'm just now in my head, it's just the commercial. Doom, 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 doom. Wasn't there? That was heard it through the grapevine.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Sorry. That's no.
It's all right. And so, one year I also really liked lemon meringue pie. That is like a real
it's a real good choice.
And so all the staff, not just the partners, but all the staff, we would have birthdays, and if they lined up, we didn't skimp. So if one was 1 week and the next, we had cake both days. And so we did do those kind of things. It was when the Boss Appreciation Day or Administrative Assistant Secretary, when those days started coming up, and they're not on my calendar, they're not on my radar, because I'm not paying attention to that. That's when they get a little bit more dicey.
But it's nice to be appreciated.
It is.
And some of those ways, I mean, I think, ways that we can say thank you, drop those little notes to people and tell them that we see them and they're welcome, are really important habits. I mean, for me, they're habits in order to keep my, they're ways for me to like practice the ministry of gratitude. So they're very important. So what are some of those ways that you do that? What are ways that you refuel or recharge?
For myself,
Mhm.
so I think there's no one way to do it. Some days it's I need to take I'll take a long walk. And sometimes those walks will involve like conversations with friends, like put in my ear pods and go. Other days it will be like listening to music, and just walking. There's a really big, beautiful cemetery near where I live, so I go walking through the cemetery all the time.
Oh,
Uh,
that's cool.
it is. It keeps you grounded. And also, I also find things like I actually find reading theology to be can be at times.
Clearly, your library behind you says that.
Yeah,
Like you like to read.
I do. I do like to read. And so it can be restorative. Sometimes also journaling. For this particular Lent, I don't like Lenten practices. I mean, I don't like them because I'm usually not really good at them. So because I'm not good at them, I'm like, yeah, no. But this one, I'm trying something a little different. I'm actually trying to do stuff that is creative.
Mm.
And so I used to write poetry. It was not good poetry. I'm not making any claims, but I do like words, and I like using words to express things. Obviously, I preach, but I also like to do it in little short form.
Okay.
So
Like haikus or like just short poems?
short poems or short form. I am not doing iambic pentameter or haikus,
Okay.
because that would require me to count syllables, and I always forget how many. Well, I mean, I
Right.
just forget. So yeah, so that's sort of what I do.
And are you using something like, are you just setting time aside every day to be creative and just like be intentional about that? Or are you using like prompts? Like sometimes they're art prompts or whatever, like for Advent, there was one I did where they gave you a word every day. And so you just reflected on that word, and I did like a photo, right? I allowed that word to sit with me and think of what came up during that time. And then, this was a social media thing, so I shared it, but I shared the way that word appeared for me every day. So are you using a prompt, or are you just
it would have been really
really,
brilliant to use a prompt.
Lynch is not over, Evan.
Yeah, that's true. So no, I don't generally use prompts. I do try to set aside time.
Mm.
Um, that, quite honestly, has been one of the things I've relished about doing pastoral work. It's also one of my biggest struggles with pastoral work.
Hmm.
So as you mentioned earlier, I was a divorce attorney, right, for like 14 years about. And so I lived life measured in 6-minute increments. And we made money when you build, right? It's an art. And when you're trying to maximize the productivity and monetization of your time, it can sort of warp one's sense of time, actually.
Yep.
And sense of presence and being. And so one of the things that I've tried to work with as in doing pastoral work is trying to actually sort of sit back and not constantly think, what's next, what's next, what's next, and try to measure myself by how productive I've been. Sometimes it's easier than others. Like when you go do one of those visits that lasts an hour and a half, There's afterwards, there's no sense of like, oh, that was a waste of time. It was just delightful, right? That's why I do this job. I mean, that's people say, oh, it's so wonderful you take it. I'm like, this is fun. This is the fun part. Don't you understand?
Yeah, and I get, and not for all clergy. That is not the fun part for all clergy.
It's true. But
yes, for me too. I love it. I love those visits.
I mean, there was a reason why I never wanted to do family law, and I was also really good at it, which is people, right? People. I like people, and family law is one of those places where you have to like people. You don't have to, but it works better if you do. And so I like spending time with a lot of people. I like spending time with people and doing these things. So, but then when it comes to like trying to take time to ground myself, that means it's much more difficult because I have this incessant like voice in the back of my head saying, you have to do this, you have to do this, you have to do this, you have to do this. So what I've started—
As though you're not worth your time.
Well, I'm working on
say it that way. Yeah.
I'm working on that concept. It certainly helps that my billing rate now is far lower than it was. So I actually spend I come into the office in the morning before 8 o'clock. That is also part of my routine. It just is. Because I would go to my own law office sometimes at 7:30, 7:15 in the morning because the phones wouldn't ring, right? There's no one there. And I could sort of like goof off a little bit and get myself like in a place where by the time it's 8 o'clock, I'm ready to go. So I don't go that early now, but I show up, I light a candle usually, and I sit down and I read and I do some reflection for 20, 30 minutes in the morning just to sort of like set the tone. Some days it works really well. Some days it's like I'm doing everything but doing it. So I'm trying to avoid it at all costs. But even on those days, I make a practice of trying and just also understanding that there's going to be days where, especially weekdays where there's lots of things going on, like there's a funeral or other things like that. This time may feel really extravagant, but you got to spend a little bit of time, just a tad. You don't maybe not 45 minutes, but you got to get some time in just to ground yourself before the day starts.
Well, I mean, it's interesting, the things that you're talking about are interesting for me. Like, I mean, you're a parent as well. I always find it intriguing what I have chosen to teach, what lessons I hope I'm teaching my kids, recognizing that I'm teaching them several things I'm still unaware of, and they'll go to therapy later for that. But but you know, maybe, but there are some that I'm like, I really want not only to model this sort of thing for my kids, but I really want it. I'm really hoping I'm teaching it. And one of those is you're kind of mentioning is just the consistency. Like, I think that consistently doing stuff sometimes is a better bar for me, because like otherwise the bar, like you're saying, like, is this worth is this 6 minutes? Was that worth the money you're getting paid for? So that pressure of productivity and all that kind of stuff, that sometimes I'm like, just consistently doing it. So just consistently taking the walk every day is better than not taking the walk, even if it's not my best walk, even if it wasn't, so taking 30 minutes, 45 minutes to work out every day is very important, even if it's not my best practice, even if I didn't do it all well, I didn't reach a new personal record. Most of the times I don't reach a new personal record, but that like level of consistency. And the other thing that you have mentioned is that there is nobody I spend more time with than myself. So doing things that help me feel centered and grounded so that I enjoy the person I'm spending time with, whatever those practices can be. And it sounds like it's similar, like the centering and grounding makes me more aware, so I can better advocate. Like I'm aware so I can know when my body, I'm like, oh, there's a cramp in my leg, but if I don't take time, then there's just a cramp in my leg and I just ignore it all day long versus
Yeah.
going, maybe now's a good time to get up and stretch. But that spending time with, learning how to like yourself and love yourself is a huge spiritual practice, and getting ways to explore different sides of our personality. And I'm excited that you're exploring this creative side during Lent.
Yeah, I also think, though, to go back a little bit on what you're talking about, we don't often talk about discipline anymore as pastors. It's like the S word, right? We don't talk about sin and we don't talk about discipline because it seems like those are things that people, because discipline often sounds like punishment, right?
Yes.
I'm disciplining you. Well, yeah, no, you're punishing me. I think, though, that one of the things about consistency is, especially in a world where it seems like it always has to be fresh, it always has to be new, it always has to be worshiptainment. I just came up with that word yesterday, or at least I think I came up with it. I don't know if I really did. I might have borrowed it
It's
from somewhere else.
brilliant, though. It is
But
brilliant. And I do want to ask you when you're done with this, because I want to hear where your thoughts are going. But I am very curious, as you identified yourself as a word person, to see what are some of your favorite words and what are words that just make you go, ugh, I wish people would use that less. But worshiptainment, that's it. I mean, you could honestly create a meme and get it going. Like,
so
thank
I'm
you.
not so, but I think part of it is surrendering, right? Part of learning to, I think, at least for me, learning to like myself, love myself, is also to surrender not only to myself, but to the reality of where I live or what I'm doing. And I think that also means, from a theological point of view, surrendering to God in many ways and trying to figure out what does that mean in my context and what does that mean here. Because how am I supposed to, someone brought this up the other day, it's like, how am I supposed to love myself if, love someone else if I don't even love myself, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and I think sometimes we're always chasing. I'm not saying that worship shouldn't be engaging. I actually think it should be engaging. I think the engagement of worship, and I might be wrong, and maybe I am. I think some of the engagement of worship is that we need to make it more, the word I'm looking for is like, we need to involve more people. It needs to actually be more like a dialogue instead of like me or someone else just standing up there. There has to be some interaction. Now, I don't think I'm going to get call response going on with Presbyterians, and that's all right. But I do think that of trying to figure out ways to pull people out into and have meaningful interaction with worship instead of it becoming passive, because often it can seem to be passive.
Yeah.
It's not supposed to be, but we always look for ways to make it passive. So go ahead.
So one of the things that I just did, and granted, I had to do it because it was a homework assignment, but I really it was really good, and it has encouraged me to think of ways to do it again, and it's doing a communal reading of the scripture. So doing that, because it would elicit dialogue and engagement in lieu of like a written and or what performed, I guess is what you're saying, sermon, might be more helpful in terms, it might be more engaging, and not to do it all the time, but to every once in a while be like, you know what, this is a text. Maybe it's one that everybody's so familiar with that you're like, I really don't have another sermon on this text right now. The Spirit is not guiding me Like, I have no new perspective. It's the same thing that I've done before, so let me do something else. It might be more, it's not that the text doesn't have value, but the value might be in engaging with the text through a different framework. And that framework might be more of a communal reading of the text, where you read the text in a variety of translations and ask other people sort of many of the ways that we might prepare for a sermon ourselves to write it out, but giving them, some of the background context if that comes up, to say, well, of course, this is what so-and-so was talking about because this was the system that was there at the time. But I think as much as we want to be creative, I don't know how often we are encouraged to play as adults, because just in general, adult culture is not as encouraged to play as children are.
No, we're not encouraged to play. And in fact, and part of that is that we're not encouraged to use our imagination. I really actually think that when Paul was doing his spiritual gifts out, like in Galatians, he really missed out with not adding imagination to that.
But it's part of the vows now, right?
Yeah. Oh no, that actually is my favorite one. It's, I like the energy, but imagination, because it means there's play.
But I guess for non-Presbyterian or churchy people, we should probably say which vow questions we're talking about.
Oh, yeah. So if if a person's being ordained either as a minister of word and sacrament or ruling elder, I think even a deacon, there are certain things that you promise to do, and one of them is to serve the people with, what is it, love and energy,
creative humor,
something like that, in imagination. And I was listening to someone speak, and they said something that really hit me, which is imagination is the ability to see the world in a way that is different from the reality that is around you. And I think as Christians, that's what we're called to do, right? As followers of Christ, we're called to see the world differently than the reality that surrounds us. And whether that's apocalyptically, I'm not going to go there quite, but really, but also just sort of like the sense of hope, right? To see where there is hope, where, quite honestly, if I'm going to look at it objectively, what hope? We live in a world full of just, quite honestly, insane ideas. And I use that seriously. Like, our nuclear policy, because I studied politics in college, our nuclear policy is based upon us having enough nuclear weapons to deter someone from firing nuclear weapons, because they can't get all of ours. So we have just enough to make their lives miserable, if not wipe them off the face of the earth too. That's the reason we have so many of them. That's why there was a race. It wasn't because it was basically, if you build up enough of them, no one's going to mess with you, because you can destroy them just like they can destroy you. That's insane.
So mutual assured destruction.
It literally is. It's mad.
Yeah. It certainly isn't the way I would say Jesus set us up to proceed.
No.
Was not mutually assured destruction, but like mutually assured hope.
Yeah, mutually assured hope. So I think imagination in that sense, we often play it off as like, oh, kids looking up and seeing purple skies with orange clouds. Well, sometimes, depending on the sunset, you can have some purple hues with orange clouds. And what
my favorite color combo, by the way, you just nailed it. That's my favorite color combo, is purple and orange. You didn't know that, but now you do.
I did not know that. But what's wrong with imagining a future that's different? I mean, we do it all the time. That's in part what makes relationships work, right? You're imagining a world that is different, one where this person is part of your life in a way that is life-giving and also wonderful. Otherwise, you're imagining them as your enemy. So yeah, I think imagination is important, and we don't let adults do it. We say, well, you have to stay in the real world. Well, the real world's pretty depressing, actually.
It can be, yeah, certainly.
It
Yeah.
can be. It's also incredibly beautiful, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's incredibly beautiful. And so I think it's sort of teasing out where's the hope. And I think for me, one of the things that why do I have hope? I have hope because of resurrection. That's it. That's what I got. That's what I got. Because that means God wins, and that there I can work with that. Because I certainly am not going to. I certainly don't have the power within me to change the world.
That's a really beautiful picture you've just painted. I had finished a book called, what was it called? I'm not going to remember the author, by the way. Someone's going to have to Google it. It's called The Wisdom of Jesus. I'm really bad. I am so good with like actors and actresses and movie titles, and I suck in every other genre with remembering who wrote that, who sang that. Terrible. I mean, I guess your mind only has so much capacity. Which artist is this that looks so familiar? It's Picasso, Leah. Oh, right. Like, exactly. Anyway, I digress. But it talked about, particularly the point of resurrection is, in one passage, it's that the people who were present didn't know that that was going to happen. And yet they still knew who Jesus was. And so it's interesting, like, what does that mean to you, I guess, instead of what does it mean to this author? I thought it was an interesting question. What does the idea of, what is the power of resurrection? Is it that hopeful future? And what if that weren't, I realize it happened, but what does that mean? How does that change the framework then into which you live a life? Because you're talking about that, like that was a moment you can't unsee. You can't it changed the hue in your glasses, right? That's the way that you see the world. So what does that look like? What does a world look like where you are living knowing that Christ is resurrected?
Scars. Scars. And the
Well,
reason
you're not holding back. That's vivid.
Scars. And the reason I say scars is because it means our stories have value, right? And it means that the lives that we live have value and have impact. I think Thomas gets a bad rap on so many different levels, but I think Thomas had to see the scars. And I think the scars are what makes it real, right? It's what makes this world, what makes our lives matter. Because if we didn't have scars, if Christ didn't have scars, well, then what's the point, right? It's just like a restart, but it wasn't a restart. It was resurrection. It was different. And I think that means for me, healing. It's not cure, it's healing, because healing always involves scars. And that's just because I've had lots of surgeries, and so I have lots of scars. But they're there, and they're a reminder of my past, and sometimes reminders of my failings, sometimes reminders of things that I had no control over. Sometimes it's just a reminder of the story of my life. And I think scars are important. One, we all have good scar stories, right? But two, and we all like to hear good scar stories, generally speaking. Sometimes we like a little less blood or a little bit more, but
Yes,
you know your audience.
Know your audience, yeah.
And sometimes what's funny about scars is that there isn't even a really great story. Like, I have a scar on my calf from when I would jumped over a fence, a chain link fence, and scraped it through my jeans.
That hurts so much.
Yeah.
It is a stingy cut. That is a stingy cut.
It is. But the thing is, though, the only reason I jumped over the fence was because I decided to jump over the fence instead of go through the gate. It was stupid. The gate was just like 10 feet away. There was nothing like consequential. It was not like, oh, right. I was running from a dog, or no, it was, hey, this is a great idea. Let's jump over the fence. Let's see if I can jump over the fence instead of go through the gate.
And then you went, this was a less than great idea.
Great idea.
After you landed.
But at the same time, though, it's something that seemed inconsequential at the time, yet it sort of left me marked. So I think for me, the scars. I
mean, that's very interesting, because I think a lot of like the pictures, right, to think of it as the scars, because I think a lot of the pictures and images is almost like, Jesus with this halo of light around them, which is more transfiguration, right, than the resurrection.
Oh yeah.
And that, I mean, there's nothing wrong with that image. If that image is what you need, then there's like nothing wrong with it. But I think it's interesting that, yeah, these were, I mean, at that time, right, these are fresh wounds. These aren't like, this isn't like the buried scar that you can barely see anymore, which, I have some of those from childhood well spent, right? A youth well spent. And, but there are others that they just like take time, and some don't ever go away. And all our scars aren't healed the same way. And some, it's those emotional scars as well, which is rather beautiful. And not there, there are times that you go, I mean, I talk to God very candidly, as I most people, but some of my best conversations, my prayer walks with God are ones where God has a very sarcastic tone in my head. But it's like, God, I am not sad that I learned that lesson, but did it have to leave me with such a deep scar? Like one that just continues to come up even when I thought it's like healed. Like I thought it was gone, and it's like, oh no, now you have to deal with this scar tissue that has just continued to grow under the surface. And you're like, I don't want to I thought I was done dealing with it, but you're saying there's beauty even in that. Like that's an image of hope for resurrected people.
It's an image of hope because it means our lives have meaning. Because if there were no scars, it would essentially mean that whatever happened before goes away. But that's not what we see biblically, right? We don't see that in the Old Testament. We don't see that in the New Testament. We don't see that when Jesus, I think it was to the Sadducees, said when God gave his name to Moses, he said he was I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Not I was. I mean, I had the I was part, but not I was. But this I am, which means that that not only are we not forgotten, but that who we are for God has value and worth. I'm not even going to talk about some like ego side, but really for God, it has value and worth in who we are. And that's for me is beautiful. It can be scary. It can also be sort of liberating, because a lot of us, I think, wonder, right? Why? and I try, when people ask me why, I'll listen for a while, but I'm sort of like, can we just like move on to how? Because the why question, I can't answer that part, but we can
Right.
talk about how it happened. But the why part, if you want, I have this whole library you could read and you still won't, and they'll still at the very end of the day say, I don't know why. And so I think part of it is to sort of, for me, it means that what we go through, it is painful, and it does mark us. And so do our joys, by the way. So do our joys.
Yes, for sure.
And they also mark us. And that is that's what gives me hope that, and I understand that some people are like, well, resurrect, so I do believe in the resurrection. And if I didn't believe in the resurrection, I wouldn't do this, because I'd be like, whatever. And that means that, God willing, there is a resurrection. And somehow I get to take part in that resurrection. That, whatever that means, that it's me, or it's God's, my story and who I am is part of that resurrection. And it's not just like, oh, we're going to put some, whatever it turns out to be, oh, this will just be a rep. No. It's, the story is still there.
Yeah.
The story.
Well, even the language, like I often say, I am, so you are, right? God said, I am, so that we could say, I am, right? You are, so that we are kind of together, that the story is an ongoing story, and we can be marked. You're right. Like some of those scars are like, we can be marked or imprinted on in ways that give us joy. And I said I was going to ask this question, so I don't want to not ask this question. What then are those words that have imprinted on you that you're like, these are golden?
That's a good question. I haven't. I mean, I thought about the Care Bear one, but I didn't think about this one.
I'll get to the Care Bear one.
So one of the words that, one that has always impacted me once I figured out what it meant, is chesed. It's not obviously an English word. It's that good old Hebrew word which is incredibly difficult to translate in any way, shape, or form that really actually brings out its like actual meaning. But
there's so many words like that. Yes,
there's so many. But is this sense of like this deep, abiding, faithful, loving kindness of almost like a giving of self to the person out of almost out of loyalty, right? It's this sense of, and it's this self-sacrifice of love in a way that is, and there's covenantal aspects to it as well, and all these things, but it is just this beautiful thing. Another one is, and I'm not even going to pronounce it, but there's this word in the Greek that literally means when you feel this certain emotion, your like whole like your gut like literally clenches, and that one I really like, because it means there's these emotions we have that just like utterly clenches. In English, I like the fact that we can splice words. We're not as good as the Germans are. I'm just going to put that out there.
Well, because you speak some German, so that's a place of understanding. Yeah,
I do. And so no, we don't have words like Schadenfreude, which is this beautiful word of like taking joy in other people's sorrow,
right,
in pain.
Trevor Noah, I think it is, does this great bit on that in one of his comedy specials.
And if it's a total tangent, but if a person really begins to understand the German mindset, it makes sense why you have this word, right? It's a pretty cloudy place, and people get on each other's nerves. It's also, there's an honesty to it. What I really like is that there's an honesty to it. It's not that they say it with approval. It's just an honesty about human nature that says we take joy in other people's pain, and that there's also that. But like the fact that we can do things and come up with weird terms that people understand, like worshiptainment.
Yes.
That's just it's extraordinary, right?
Mm-hmm.
We don't have, some like French, France has this essentially governing body that determines what is French and what is not French for language purposes. We don't have that. The closest thing we have is like Merriam-Webster's dictionary, and like the Oxford Dictionary. Those are the closest things we have, are two like institutions that we put way too much trust in, that are out there for profit.
The OED was my dad's Scrabble dictionary, which was hard as a kid because like that's a dictionary you look at. Now this was an old version because like I grew up a long time ago. There are many, many new words now. But like you literally had a drawer with a magnifying glass. So you could look at the words because that's how many words were in all the small print. So you just gave me flashbacks of my youth.
Yeah, because you were there probably trying to memorize all the words that began with Q, because that's always the one that
right, or 2-letter words, golden in Scrabble.
So words I don't like, I don't know if there is a word I don't like. I think there are words that cause people a lot of pain. And so those are the words that I feel that even if it doesn't cause me pain, those are the words that I don't want to say, I don't want to give it like the history behind that word is so fraught with pain, suffering, and often oppression, and and also degradation of people's humanity, that those are words that I avoid.
Out of respect for other people?
Oh, absolutely. And also out of respect for myself. That may sound weird, but it's like, why do I want to go around saying words that are going to hurt,
intentionally
are going to hurt people, and cause offense? To me, that's not who I am. And that's not who I want to be. And so, there are always times when where one stumbles upon a word and you have no clue really what it means, and you say it and someone goes, whoa, 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 and you're like, oh,
I didn't know.
I did not know about that one.
Right, so, but that's knowledge, right? Knowledge is
that's knowledge. But I think I think at a certain point, once you get to a point of knowledge, and it's sort of like, you have quote unquote freedom, right? But it's not freedom from consequences, and it's not freedom from people thinking you're a jerk. So and if that's what you want to do, great, but that's not where I want to go. So.
It's interesting. You're talking about the freedom almost, that like it's okay that we have scars, but you don't really want to participate in helping to create them for other people. No. Unless they are places of joys, right? Unless they're markings of joy or love or grace. That there's an intentional act of sometimes scripturally I think it's praying without ceasing, right? So being mindful of our actions and choices, which doesn't mean we never create harm, but that our intent isn't to create harm. And then being open enough, because sometimes I think what happens is we defend what we've done rather than being open to going, oh, let me not do that. Let me give you feedback, or let me be in a relationship with you where actually be helpful versus hurtful. Like I say sometimes about like my spouse is, he is not the first person to say certain things to me about, right? His goal isn't to correct me or make me a better person. Those are my choices, whatever that means. Yeah. But he says things sometimes in new ways that I can actually hear it for the first time. So then I pause and go, oh, well, I don't want to do that. I don't like, that sounds hurtful. The way you just said it, I realized I don't want to proceed that way. And that, it's a reminder of being communal, and that covenantal relationship is more important than getting all my needs met in the exact moment that I need to have them. Like more important, I guess, than my individuality, I would say. It's probably a better way to say that.
Yeah, but I think also this is where like grace comes in, right?
For sure.
Because, I think part of it is to step back just a little bit. Yeah, I mean, I don't need to help someone create scars. They're going to do it life
is going to do it, right?
Anyway, going to happen. So, if I'm intentionally going about it, it's just going to be like threefold instead of like twofold. And also I think sometimes when we do that, we also scar ourselves. And I can only, not that I'm like pain adverse, I just want to be wise about it. But I also think, though, this is where grace comes in. And this is something that we don't really acknowledge, I don't think, all the time, which is,
we being the church, we being clergy.
We being church, clergy, people in general.
Okay.
Grace is also given grace is the ability to understand that maybe, just maybe, the person didn't mean to hurt you the way you thought. And that maybe, just maybe, if we approach it in a different way, that we can go about it differently. But it only works right if the person doesn't have a reason to be defensive. And so when we punish people, or we intentionally go out of our ways to make it to dissuade people from actually admitting or listening when they've made a mistake, instead hiding it, and then all of a sudden like becoming incredibly defensive about it and say, oh, I didn't make it, because they know what happens if they admit it, right? All hell, it's just like, all hell breaks loose. And grace is giving people space to acknowledge and learn not without consequences, but not without punitive consequences.
Well, you're talking not without assured mutual destruction.
Yeah.
Right.
So there's a difference between being punitive and, saying, hey, you really hurt me. But I think people will be a lot less defensive if if we didn't also like seek revenge, right? Well, I hurt you, so you hurt me, so I get to hurt you. Well, no, that doesn't
Or
work.
I am hurting, so I'm going to hurt you.
Well, that's true too, and we all do that.
But yeah, but
Yeah.
that, I mean, that's some of like that, all of that is punitive, right? It hurts me, hurts you, doesn't better, it's certainly not bettering anybody, but yeah, you're right. Maybe we're not talking about, certainly our systems are still designed to be punitive rather than places of reconciliation. I would like to think, I mean, our denomination's model is to be a place of reconciliation. I think we're still learning how to do that. And there are places where we might need to spend a little more time denominationally doing that hard work, because it is hard work to really reconcile, to be able to air all one's grievances and hear all the grievances being aired. It's difficult, right? That's difficult. And then to go, yeah, we're going to proceed together with grace. We're going to give each other some grace, which doesn't mean we're going to walk away besties.
No, that never means that. But if we think of like repentance, like in its original idea of like you turn, grace is sometimes you're giving a person enough space to make a U-turn.
Whew.
Because if we don't give people space to make a U-turn and do it out of concern for the other person, it doesn't work. I learned this as a divorce attorney. Judges can't, I mean, not that they do anyway. Sometimes judges try to order people not to be jerks. It never works, right?
Just do better.
Just do, and they, when I say this, I'm not trying to make fun of the judge, because they're really are trying, because they're looking at these folks, and just like, not that the judge is but just like people sometimes see a couple folks in front of them and they're just like, I see what's going on. If you just stopped antagonizing each other, I'm not saying you have to get back together. No, never, don't. But just for the sake of your kids, if you just stop antagonizing each other intentionally, maybe I won't ever see you again, please.
Yeah, just pause. Just press the pause button. Just no, but I mean, we see that all, that happens all the time it can happen in relationship. I mean, there are people that you're like, wow, that person really bothers me. And you might not even know why they're bothering you, right? But as we were saying, as you were sort of saying at the beginning, that, practicing the grounding, all those skills help us increase our awareness so that we have a wider view versus this like narrow understanding. I think sometimes we think narrow is the gate to the kingdom, but that does not mean our viewing should be narrow. Jesus's viewing was never narrow. His intentionality, like he walked a narrow path, which is not the same, but he saw everything. And those are very different images.
It is a very different image. And I think this is sometimes if we're going to go about this intentionally, we do walk a narrow path. Because we're trying to balance a number of different things. We're trying to balance our, wants with what our needs are. I may want a brand new Audi A6, but I don't need a brand new Audi A6. I just need my car to run.
Correct.
And seat warmers. Seat warmers are a need.
Here in upstate New York, for sure.
Yeah. So, and so we have that internal dialogue of what's going on, right? But we also have to sort of balance what our needs are with each other. And one of the things that always struck me about John Calvin And there's a lot of things about John Calvin that I'm like, no, John, no, 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 don't. But one of the things that he did, what was actually mind-blowingly radical in my mind, was some of his sermons on the Ten Commandments, and how he talked about hoarding as theft. So this idea for John, because John Calvin, as you may recall, he has this really, really strong idea of providence, and everything, God's pretty much directing everything, and he wants to figure out how the heck this works.
Right.
And so part of his reconciliation of all these conflicting things, like we have really, really rich people who are just horrible, and we have lots of poor people. What's going on here? Why? And for him, part of what he's saying is that the rich people are stealing from the poor, because the rich people are holding what God has given them to give to the poor. And now we can disagree about all, but his ideas about this were that for him, charity wasn't an offset. It was like, you give because God has given you life, therefore you are to give it unto someone else.
Right.
One of my favorite lines in one of his sermons was, he talked about people who withheld wages of day laborers as half murderers.
Oof.
Because
John did not mince his words, did he?
No. And quite honestly, people talk about social justice. I'm like, don't read John Calvin. Or don't read his sermons. Don't read his sermons, because let me tell you, his sermons on ethics and kind of stuff, he did not approve of violent overthrows of government, but he also didn't approve of people holding on to things and abusing people. And he said it's half murder, because that man, because of course, that man needs that money. He needs his wages to be able to buy bread and drink. And if he doesn't have bread and drink, he will die. Therefore, you have caused his death by cheating him out of his wages. And so that kind of sense of interdependence and sense of relationship, I think is one of those things that we really need to, sensibly cultivate, because we're not an island unto ourselves. We're really not.
No.
And when we think of ourselves as
that was John Donne, right? Not John Calvin.
Yeah.
Or John Milton? Was it Milton? See, don't know.
I don't know. And if it was John Donne, he might have been trying to, like, I actually liked John Donne's poetry, but he was probably writing an island unto myself that you should come to, my lady, so that we can get it on. He wrote that all before, of course, he became a famous preacher. But it's this sense of my actions here affect other people. My love of this stupid phone affects other people, because I know Apple isn't paying fair wages. That's why they're, they make tons of money off of it, but I love it. And so there's a sense of how we don't like it, but how do we balance out the tensions that are inherent in our existence? And I think we don't do a very good job of it. I don't think and because it's overwhelming, quite honestly, it's really, which is why we need grace. Which is why we need grace, because if we start to admit our mistakes and stop judging ourselves, there's a difference between judging and condemning.
Right. Guilt and shame.
If we start admitting that, my purchase of Apple products, just like my purchase of like stuff from like, Old Navy or anything else like that. I'm not saying anything that hasn't already been documented. The conditions of the places where these people work are horrible. And I'm helping perpetuate that. So instead of getting really defensive about it, I think we need to understand that maybe we have to make different choices. And I don't know what those choices are. And so don't ask me why. Don't ask
I
me.
I will not, because I'm getting ready to ask you what your Care Bear belly symbol would be, not your economic plan of equity and liberation, which is a whole different conversation.
Whole different conversation.
Which I look forward to having, to be honest. I sometimes, I sometimes go, yeah, I don't know how to fix the thing. I just am telling you it's broken. Like, it's broken because there are people that are being oppressed and hurt in the process. And that indicates that there's a brokenness that needs to be addressed. But I might not be the person who has, I have ideas, but ultimately, if I don't have the skills, then those ideas result in my duct taping, right? Like, that's which, band-aiding sometimes is what we need to do in triage situations, but having people who are skilled and again, intentional, which you talked about, who understand what a polluted water source does as it filters out, is important. And some of us can pay attention to the filtering out. And there are others who are skill setted to go, if we want to really understand this whole system, then we need multiple workers, I guess.
We do. And I don't think that our human brains can't comprehend it. We can't. We can barely comprehend what's going on in our hometowns, for that matter.
I think Jesus said that to us. Like, you don't understand earthly things. How do I explain to you heavenly things?
Yeah. Thank you, last week's lectionary.
Is that was it? Let's see.
Yeah.
I was using narrative. That I didn't preach that one.
But no, but I think also part of it also is the sense of sometimes the solution isn't ours.
Oof.
Because if we look at most human solutions, we often trade oppressed people with more oppressed people. So, like, yeah, it wasn't like, yes. Yeah, the American Revolution. I like the country I live in. I really do. There are times I don't, but for the most part, I really do.
Well, that's any relationship, right? For the most part, we like it. But
But
there are times when you go,
we traded oppression for oppression, right?
Mm-hmm.
The Communist Revolution, it traded oppression for oppression. The czars were horrible. So was Stalin. This is what we do as humans. When we try to tear down a system, all we do is we often bring people with us who we believed were oppressed or are now seeking freedom. And to gain their freedom, what they do is they oppress someone else. And so I think sometimes the solution isn't ours. It is, I think, to be conscious. I think it is to try to make choices. I think it's trying to determine, what does it mean to love this person that I'm afflicting? And how do I do that as a person, as one person of like billions? But I also, what Audre Lorde said, you can't tear down the master's house with the master's tools. And I realize that's a paraphrase, but she's absolutely right. There's no but, and she's absolutely right. And that's what I think is the hope of the gospel. Because the hope of the gospel is that Rome doesn't win. Rome doesn't win. The cross doesn't win. The tomb doesn't win. God wins.
Right.
But God's winning doesn't involve more tombs and more crosses. That, I think, is the part we don't always talk about.
They're empty. Both of those places are empty now.
And God didn't seek revenge. And so God's response to the cross was not more crosses or more tombs. God's response was life to the very people who created the crosses and dug the tomb. So that, I think, is the part where I have hope, because it says that I'm going to flail, right? Do my best. It's like every time I go on Twitter, it's confirmation that, John Calvin was right in some respects. And yes, human depravity, absolutely true. But that's also, there's grace in that, right?
Yes.
There's grace in that because it says that my lack of perfection isn't the end. My lack of perfection isn't the end. It is not the cause of it is not the cause of the ruin of the world. It is the cause of the ruin of the world, but it's not the cause. I can't make the world. I mean, I can make the world in some respects like worse by doing things to people I love and other things and making their lives miserable. But in the end, it is what I am who I am.
You are literally right now transitioning into my Care Bear question. I don't know if you did that on purpose, but it is the final question, and we are at time. I love this and I hate this because I could continue to talk to you for several more hours and drink more coffee and all of that. I probably don't need more coffee, but you just transitioned into, right, that some of it is literally taking the gifts that you've been gifted by God, standing in the place where God has placed you, and shooting that love straight out to the world that you're connected to. And that's and healing, creating healing along the way in this land of Care-a-Lot. So what is, Evan, what is your Care Bear belly symbol, and what color Care Bear are you? Which doesn't, I mean, it has as much depth as you place in it.
Oh, so I don't want to seem like I'm copying you, but purple is my favorite color.
It's a good color.
It absolutely is. And I have toyed with other colors in the past, sort of like, I don't want to say dated them, but I always knew that purple was my favorite, but I always figured I probably should have a different one because it wasn't socially acceptable to have, I had enough problems on the Montana playgrounds. I didn't need to say purple was my favorite color.
It can be now though, like live into it
can
now.
be now. It is. And I truly enjoy that. I think, so there's a story behind this. In college, I participated in these retreats, college retreats done through I went to a Catholic school, and we had these retreats and I participated in them as, first as someone who went to it, and then as leadership and all that fun stuff. And at a pre-retreat retreat, we were having a discussion, and people were supposed to use images to describe someone, and then someone was supposed to guess. And it was they were talking about me, and I don't know how the whole thing worked, but I was also in on it, and someone said lighthouse, and they said Evan. My answer was not lighthouse. I never would have thought myself that way. But to everyone else in that group in that moment, it made perfect sense to them. And they're like, that's perfect. I love lighthouses. I think they're beautiful. I think the idea of a lighthouse is amazing. And they're often in some of the worst places that you can have the worst weather, right? So I guess the symbol would be that. I don't know how it matches though, because I think one of my spiritual gifts is, I would say, is probably gentleness. And that's a weird thing to say from someone who practiced family law for 14 years. But maybe it took 14 years to figure that out. Someone asked me one thing that I never wanted to do again. And my answer was, I never want to be someone else's weapon again. And so there's gentleness in there.
I mean, a lighthouse it's designed in some ways as to gently guide things to the shore so they don't crash in. I mean, there are lots of ways you could read that. I mean,
so it'd be a lighthouse. Probably not purple in the light, because that doesn't work so hot for storms, right? But whatever the best light is, and I think gentleness, really, because that involves so many other parts about it. And I don't think I would have given that answer 5 years ago, or even 6 years ago. One of the things I really did learn as a divorce attorney was, it wasn't that I didn't like the work. I like problem solving. I like helping people get out of messes. And let me tell you, I saw some really horrible messes. What I didn't like, and what eventually drove me out, was ultimately the stress of not being able to be myself, but to be someone's hired gun. And as much as I had to fight against it, after a while, the fight and the stress of the fight became too much. And so I had to make a choice. Do I, and I was burning out. I was just burning out. It was pretty.
You can't shine as a lighthouse if you're burnt out, Evan. You just can't.
Yeah. And so it was pretty clear that as much as I enjoyed working with people, as much as I enjoyed sometimes even working with my own clients, and as much as I enjoyed a lot of the things that went into it, I couldn't be the person that they wanted me to be. And I happen to know what they wanted me to be, because they'd tell me what they want to be, and they'd say, this is why I'm paying you. Right. And so, yeah, being paid to be someone's weapon was a lesson.
Well, now you're getting paid to be a lighthouse. And so thank you for sharing your spiritual gentleness with us. That hymn is going through my head now, but I will spare people in listening to me sing it right now. But thank you for your time and for being my guest.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me. This was wonderful. It was a delightful moment to be able to talk with you, and I really appreciate the invitation. So.